Hey guys, Mike here, and in this video I will have side by side the Google Nexus 5 and the Samsung Galaxy S4. Both are top tier Android smartphones with 5-inch screens, but play in different price leagues. You'll find more about that and all the other tiny details that set these two handsets apart in the next few minutes, so let's get started. First of all, I have to tell you that these phones are similarly sized. In fact, even when having them one next to the other, it's hard to say that the Samsung is fractions of a millimeter thinner and shorter than the Nexus 5. On top of that, both lean the scales at about 130 grams. However, when grabbing the two in your hands, you might end up liking more how the S4 feels, and that's because of its rounded edges and softer plastic case. On the other hand, the glossy back of the Galaxy is going to scratch easily, while the matte finishing on the Nexus 5 should be more reliable. The Nexus also seems sturdier, as it doesn't squeak like the S4 when grabbed, but that's mainly because of that removable plastic back cover on the Samsung, which offers access to the easily replaceable battery and the microSIM and microSD card slots. The back is encased on the Nexus, which lacks a storage expansion card slot, by the way. In fact, it lacks some of the features offered by the S4, like the IR blaster, the support for air gestures and commands, or the extra sensors inside like the barometer and the pedometer. But I don't think any of these are real deal breakers, unlike the lack of the microSD card slot. Anyway, let's turn our attention on the front faces of these phones, dominated by two large 5-inch screens. The Nexus 5 actually comes with a 4.95-inch display, but we'll just round it up to 5-inch as well. Anyway, both the screens are sharp with 1920 by 1080 pixel resolution. Both are bright and offer nice viewing angles, and both are covered by a protective layer of Gorilla Glass 3. However, there are a few differences between the two panels, as there's an IPS Plus one on the Nexus 5 and a Super AMOLED one on the Galaxy S4. As a result, the S4 paints overly saturated colors and deep blacks, but is not very bright, while the Nexus 5 impresses with its whites and not with its somewhat dull-looking, washed-out colors. Either way, both devices feature above-average displays and you should be more than happy with them. As a side note though, the Android commands are integrated within the interface on the Nexus 5, while the S4 uses dedicated controls below the actual display, which means that a small strip of the canvas will be occupied by these buttons on the Nexus 5, while this does not happen on the Samsung smartphone. Moving on, the Nexus 5, like all Nexuses before, bundles a powerful hardware platform and the latest Android version 4.4 KitKat. The new OS brings a handful of subtly redesigned elements and some new features as well, like the smarter dialer and Google Now integration. But more importantly, it promises to run smoother than any Android version before. And when next to the Samsung Galaxy S4 running Android 4.3 Jelly Bean with TouchWiz on top, KitKat holds its promise. There's absolutely no lag or sluggishness with the Nexus 5, while the S4 stumbles from time to time. We have the Qualcomm 600 powered version here, by the way, with 2GB of RAM, while on the Nexus there's a Qualcomm 800 chip and 2GB of memory as well. At the end of the day though, both phones can handle everything you will throw at them, from basic tasks to movies or games. The Nexus 5 is slightly faster, but the S4 is not a slugger by any means and keeps the pace in most cases. Samsung does bundle the S4 with a large selection of pre-installed apps and features, like those gestures and air commands I was talking about earlier, and those probably have their impact on its overall speed. The Nexus 5 packs a much cleaner version of the OS, the so-called vanilla Android, with Google's services bundled and not much else, so it's a bare bone for you to build on top with the many apps in Google's Play Store. But while vanilla Android is slick looking and fast, I've always considered that it has one major flaw: it's not very efficient. And that hasn't changed on the Nexus 5, which barely gets you through the day with average use. It's true, there's a smaller 2300 mAh battery on Google's handset, while Samsung squeezed a larger 2600 mAh one on the S4. But this Galaxy can easily last till the evening on a single charge, or even for 2 days if used smartly. On top of that, don't forget that you can swap out the battery inside the S4 for a new one if really needed, while on the Nexus that's not an option. Those aside, there are a few other things I should tell you about these devices. For instance, both feature notification LEDs, but the one on the Nexus, placed below the screen, is much brighter. Connectivity-wise, the two devices are both top-notch, with 4G LTE support, Wi-Fi AC, Bluetooth, NFC, GPS and all the other goodies. The S4 adds the IR blaster on top of everything else. The Nexus offers, however, support for wireless charging out of the box, and while that's an option for the Galaxy as well, you will have to pay for a special backplate for it. Moving on, as we draw close to the end of this clip, there are two more important aspects to talk about: the cameras and the prices. As a camera phone, the S4 is a notch on top of the Nexus 5. It's not because it has a 13-megapixel shooter while the Nexus 5 has only an 8-megapixel one. I don't care about that, and you shouldn't either. It's because the pics and the videos coming out of the S4 look better, sharper, more detailed than those coming out of the Nexus 5 in most cases. In low light, the S4 performs rather poorly, and the Nexus 5 should do better, as it packs optical image stabilization. But again, the results are only average, as the Google handset will struggle to focus more often than you'd want in low light or when tracking a moving subject. In fact, the focus ghosting and the slow and laggy camera app drag the Nexus down badly, while on the S4 the camera app is smart and stuffed with all sorts of features and shooting modes. Bottom point, the Nexus 5 is only an average shooter, as proven by the pics and videos shown here, and that's just something you'll have to accept. Of course, given how the Nexus 5 is off-contract much cheaper than the Galaxy S4, it was obvious that corners had to be cut somewhere, and the poor battery life and the camera performances are the Google's handset's most annoying quirks. And considering how in the US the Galaxy S4 starts at about $550 off contract, while the Nexus 5 starts at about $350, I see why many of you might settle for those issues and get the Nexus. With contracts though, things are a bit different and the price gap between the two devices gets narrower, in which case the S4 stands out as a winner here. That if you don't mind its glossy body, the super saturated screen or Samsung's TouchWiz Android implementation. And if you want a decent camera phone with good battery life, or just an overall good smartphone. So in the end, it's up to you to choose between these two based on your preferences and budget. The Nexus 5 can be more affordable than its rival, but the S4 is a more complete phone without any real deal breakers, unlike Google's device. With that in mind, it's time to wrap this up. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon. In the meantime though, hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video and don't forget to let me know in the comments below what would you choose between these two devices and why. Catch you later.